But finally, spring comes, and with it, fresh food and hope.
It is a remarkable thing that 2 or 3 fathoms of snow and ice on the river should all be melted in less than 12 days. On the 8th of April, the air was still rather cold. Some of those who were ill with the scurvy got better. On the 5th of June, there arrived at our settlement a ship, which gave me much joy and relief. Of our company, now only 8 of the 28 remained, and half of these were ailing.
Just 8 men left. Sick and exhausted, barely alive. No one realizes they have staked a claim that will resound for centuries. But Canada belongs to someone else. The French need allies and teachers if they are to unlock the secrets of this land. There is much to learn. Champlain and his handful of Frenchmen have entered a complex and volatile world that is not theirs. But the native peoples of Canada are prepared to tolerate these strange new arrivals, as long as they are useful. The Montagnais and the Algonquin have already been trading with the French for 10 years. They are allies of the powerful Huron, who live near the Great Lakes. Together they control the territory north of the St. Lawrence. To the south live their traditional enemies, the Iroquois, a confederation of 5 nations. For now, the Iroquois are cut out of the trade with the Europeans. In the summer of 1609, Champlain learns a basic lesson about doing business in North America. No trade without a military alliance. Champlain already knows the Algonquin chief Iroquet, who introduces him to a new partner, the Huron chief Uchtagwan. They urge him to go to war with them against the Iroquois.
I promised to help them in their wars, both to engage them the more to love us, and also to help my enterprises and explorations, which could only be carried out with their help.
Realizing he can do nothing without Indian allies, Champlain agrees. And so, a war party of 300 Indians and 9 Frenchmen sets off from Quebec at the end of June. For a month, they head south through lands no European has ever seen. But as they travel deeper into Iroquois territory, many in the party turn back. Only 60 Indians remain now, along with 3 Frenchmen. At Ticonderoga Point, they finally meet the enemy. On the night of July 30th, the 2 sides prepare for battle.
The whole night was spent in dances and songs on both sides, with many insults. Our side telling the Iroquois that they would see such deeds of arms as they had never seen.
At dawn, they come face to face with 200 Iroquois warriors.
Our Indians told me that those who had the big headdresses were the chiefs, and that there were only 3 of them, whom you could recognize by these feathers, which were larger than those of their companions. I was to do what I could to kill them. Our Indians called me with loud cries. They divided into 2 groups, made way for me, and put me ahead. As soon as they caught sight of me, halted and stared at me. When I saw them make a move to draw their bows upon us, I took aim with my arquebuse and fired straight at one of the 3 chiefs. I had put 4 bullets into my arquebuse. As soon as our people saw this shot so favorable for them, they began to shout loudly. Meanwhile, the arrows flew thick on both sides. The Iroquois were much astonished that 2 men should have been killed so quickly. This frightened them greatly. As I was reloading my arquebuse, one of my companions fired a shot. Seeing their chiefs dead, they lost courage and took flight into the depth of the forest.
The alliance is sealed in blood. Champlain has passed his first test.
We all separated with great declarations of mutual friendship. They asked me if I would not go to their country and help them like a brother. I promised them.
The French are now partners in a great alliance, but they have also made the 5 nations of the Iroquois their mortal enemies. For almost a century to come, they will pay the price. A great network of lakes and rivers, the arteries of the continent, links Quebec to the land of the Huron. It takes a month of travel to reach a tranquil valley by the shores of a great lake. This is Huronia. The first Frenchman to go there is just 18 years old. Etienne Brulé is one of the survivors of the terrible winter of 1609. A year later, Champlain sends him to the Huron in exchange for one of their young men. This is another building block of their alliance.
I was forced to stay all winter, waiting for company and escort. I took this opportunity to explore the country and to visit the neighboring tribes.
Brulé is welcomed, taught the Huron language and way of life. His most important task is to convince the Huron to bring their beaver skins to the trading post at Quebec each spring.
After having spent some time with these savages, I determined to withdraw to our settlement. And taking leave of them, I promised to introduce them to the French. I would return as soon as I could.
Etienne Brulé's commercial mission is a success, but he will return from Huronia a different man.
On the 13th of June, 200 Indians brought back Etienne Brulé, who came back dressed like an Indian. He was well pleased with the treatment he had received. He explained to me all that he had seen during the winter and what he had learned from them. He had learned their language very well.
Other young men follow him. Duvernay, Desmarais, Jean Nicolet. Guided by their Indian allies, they travel through the lakes and rivers, learning more about the lands to the west. The trading system of the Huron and the French now reaches into the heart of the continent. Before long, the little outpost at Quebec is receiving 15,000 beaver skins a year. The Indians are satisfied too. A Montagnier boasts that trade makes them wealthy and more powerful.
The beaver does everything perfectly well for us. It makes kettles, hatchets, swords, knives. In short, it makes everything.
In 1615, Champlain visits Huronia, discovering a complex and fascinating society.
In this extent of country, there are 18 villages, which may amount to 30,000 souls. Their lodges are covered with tree bark. And at the end of these cabins is a space where they keep their Indian corn. In one such cabin, there could be as much as 12 fires and 24 families.
As he comes to know the Huron better, Champlain decides they can be more than commercial and military allies.
I realized that it would be a great sin if I did not devise some means of bringing them to the knowledge of God. To attain this end, I looked for some good friars with zeal for the glory of God.
The Récollets are the first to bring word of the Christian God into the Canadian forest. One of them, Gabriel Sagard, is astonished by the Huron reaction to the French.
They have such a horror of the beard that sometimes when they try and insult us, they call us Sesco Inerante, that is to say bearded. Moreover, they think it makes people more ugly and weakens their intelligence. Thus, these good folk think of us as very unintelligent by comparison with themselves. And at every moment, and on the slightest occasion, they say to you, Tayon Dion, That is to say, you have no sense.
Sagar is also scandalized by the conduct of his French countrymen. Trade and religion do not go together well.
Most of the blame for the interference was on the part of the French. Their immoral lifestyle aside, most among them did not want us to convert any Indian. They were afraid it might disrupt the beaver trade. One and only reason for their journey. My God. My blood runs cold when I think that a beaver pelt meant more to them than the salvation of a people.
After 10 years, Quebec remains a tiny, isolated outpost, scarcely 50 people who make their living from the fur trade. There is only one family of settlers, Louis Hébert, his wife Marie Rollet, and their 3 children. But Champlain has much bigger ideas. He realizes there is more to Canada than fur. So to attract investors and more settlers, he draws up a glowing account of its potential. Everywhere he looks, Champlain sees ways for men and women to make a good living here. Wood from the mighty forests, minerals from the soil, fertile land for crops, inexhaustible supplies of fish from the rivers, lakes, and oceans. And all that on top of the wealth from the fur trade.
The traffic and trade in furs is not to be scorned. Marten, beaver, fox, lynx, moose and deer robes are commodities from which one can derive at present more than 400,000 livres.
But he predicts the other resources will be worth 10 times more, 5 million livres a year. Samuel de Champlain crosses the Atlantic 20 times to promote his plan for a full-fledged colony. It takes 10 years before he succeeds. But eventually, he catches the ear of one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, the Cardinal and Duc de Richelieu.
The fur trade is most attractive, as it does not require the use of any money. All it requires are goods such as holsters, scissors, knives, needles, fobs, hatbands, or any other kind of dry goods.
Richelieu recruits 100 investors at 3,000 livres apiece. This is the Company of 100 Associates. Champlain becomes the Cardinal's personal lieutenant. The new company assembles a fleet of 10 ships, carrying 400 settlers, livestock, and provisions, but they will never reach the settlement of Quebec. France and England are now at war. 2 English privateers, the Kirke brothers, intercept the French convoy near Tadoussac. Champlain, who is running out of food and has no reinforcements, is forced to surrender Quebec.
Louis Kirke landed some 150 armed men and proceeded to take possession of the settlement. He advanced to the fort to remove me from my quarters. He had the English flag hoisted on one of the bastions, ordered the drums to beat to assemble the soldiers, and had a salute fired, a signal of rejoicing.
For Champlain, it is the end of 20 years' work. He returns to France. Repercussions from the loss of Quebec are felt in Huronia. Etienne Brûlé, Champlain's favorite, has betrayed him by going to work for the English interlopers. He has a falling out with the Huron. They torture Brûlé to death. The English hold Quebec for 3 years. When the war ends, it is given back to France for 1 million livres. But before they leave, the Kirkes destroy everything. Samuel de Champlain is now 63 years old. He returns to Quebec at Cardinal Richelieu's orders and starts from scratch once again. In the next 2 years, Champlain sees his colony reborn. On Christmas Day, 1635, the tough old soldier dies quietly. The man who almost single-handedly established France in North America leaves no descendants. For the next 30 years, Champlain's colony will welcome new immigrants, face old enemies, and unwittingly help destroy its closest ally. The French bring new and strange things to the New World. Mystics and missionaries bring word of their God. Unknowingly, they also bring disease and demoralization. It leads to the destruction of their closest allies and a war that almost destroys the colony itself. Yet New France will survive, and a new people will be born.
I don't know what the country of the Huron is, but I do know that I would rather go there than to an earthly paradise. It is not fitting that everyone should know how much heavenly light one finds in the thick darkness of this barbarism. We would have too many persons wishing to come here.
They were called soldiers of Christ. The Jesuit missionaries were spread over half the earth. Now they plan to bring the word of the Christian God to the 25,000 souls of Huronia.
The fathers whom God shall call to the holy mission of the Hurons ought to exercise careful foresight in regard to all the hardships, annoyances, and perils that must be encountered. For leaving a highly civilized community You fall into the hands of barbarous people who care but little for your philosophy or your theology, and utterly despise you.
The Huron have their own gods and aren't interested. The Champlain had insisted, no black robes, no trade. The first Jesuits, like Jean de Brébeuf, have trouble even reaching Huronia.
The Hurons would have been very willing to take some Frenchmen who were well armed. But they did not want these long robes who carried no guns. They only wanted to take 3. 2 young Frenchmen and one of ours. We promise we will paddle, we give presents, we insist as much as we can. The Huron will not take any more.
It is a meeting of 2 different worlds, 2 alien cultures. The Jesuits find it hard to give up their European ways.
For want of a table and household utensils, we eat on the ground. We have neither salt, oil, fruits, bread, nor wine, except what we keep for the Mass. Our bed is made with a piece of bark upon which we put a blanket. We have no sheets to speak of. The smoke fills the whole cabin and spoils everything that we keep. At night, we have no other light except that of the fire in the cabin, which permits us to recite our breviary.
As more Jesuits arrive, they build permanent missions in Huronia, the biggest at Sainte Marie. They bring young Frenchmen with them as servants, including 16-year-old Charles Le Moyne and Pierre Boucher, only 15. Boucher is fascinated by the Huron beliefs.
They believe in the immortality of the soul, and that after death it goes to a beautiful country. They have a number of fables that they relate. They have knowledge of spirits and a great aversion to sorcerers. They are very superstitious and have faith in their dreams. This is what gives the most trouble to the Jesuit fathers who try to instruct them.
There are few conversions, but each one is carefully recorded. Every year, the Jesuit Superior in Quebec issues a report on their activities. The relation of the most remarkable events in the missions of the Company of Jesus in New France. It is a compelling account of their triumphs and tribulations.
I learned on a bit of bark that the demons in Huronia were let loose and were powerfully opposing our plans. Turning it all over in my mind, I found myself amazed at the greatness of God. For the bloodier a battle is, the nobler the victory, and the more glorious the triumph.
News of the Jesuits' missionary work among the Huron, translated into Latin, Italian, and German, reaches devout Catholics all over Europe.
I learned through my eyes and my ears how France was on fire for us, and how the upper countries of the savages were nothing but ice. I read on one side that the great of the earth were giving us their hearts for heaven, and that the small of the world, thus I call those who know not God, held us in abhorrence.
The Jesuit stories of suffering and salvation in the dark forests of the New World have a dizzying effect. The ardor they inspire will soon bring a new group of immigrants to New France. The Mystics. For decades, France has been racked by religious warfare between Catholics and Protestants.